Hey everyone, it's Matty here, and today we'll be diving into a game that's been on everyone's radar, Redfall. Coming from the acclaimed creators of the Dishonored series, Prey, and the recent hit Deathloop, expectations were pretty high for this one. And even though it's not everyone's favourite genre, being an open world RPG, looter shooter, Arcane Studios tend to create an engaging and fun game. Sadly, I have to say that Redfall has turned out to be a colossal disappointment. My plan last week was to have this game as this channel's first playthrough, but after recording for a couple of hours, I realised that it would be the most non-entertaining playthrough ever. In this look at the game, we'll be exploring the various aspects of Redfall that have failed to deliver, from gameplay mechanics to story and quests, and the lack of an engaging open world. Now, the skills in Redfall attempt to offer a diverse range of abilities and playstyles for players to experiment with, but in practice they fall woefully short. Each character has their own unique skill tree, designed to cater to different playstyles. However, the implementation of these skill trees is inconsistent and frustrating. Some characters have abilities and perks that directly contradict their intended playstyle, which only serves to confuse players and diminish their enjoyment of the game. For example, I played as Jacob in my playthrough of the game, and he has 3 skills: a Raven, a psychic bird companion that can tag enemies, Cloak, which activates a cloaking device and becomes invisible to your enemies, and then Heartstopper, a ghostly sniper rifle that locks onto enemies and fires lethal headshots. Now, one would expect the skill tree for such a character to focus on abilities that aid in stealthy gameplay. However, Redfall's skill trees often present players with upgrade options that push them towards a more confrontational playstyle, which clashes with their character's intended design. This incongruity makes it difficult for players to build a cohesive and enjoyable experience tailored to their preferences. For example, a couple of the upgrade paths for the Raven ability actually targets enemies and alerts them. So if you're trying to use your Raven for reconnaissance, you've got to make sure you aim away from any enemies, otherwise it's just going to alert them all. With 12 skills spread across 4 characters, it's a shame you have to exit the game to change your character. A better option would be to have your own character with all skills available, and you get to pick 3 yourself so you can mix or match and create your own playstyle. This restricted progression system stifles creativity and replayability, leaving players with a monotonous and underwhelming gaming experience. So the combat mechanics in Redfall are a mix of ranged weapons from shotguns to pistols and sniper rifles, with the inclusion of UV beams and stake launchers to do extra damage to vampires, as well as the abilities we just mentioned. Unfortunately, these mechanics are marred by poor execution and a lack of polish. Ranged weapons often feel clunky and inaccurate. Playing on the Xbox Series X feels horrible. The aim feels off, and you can't alter this apart from aim sensitivity, and another option which I felt did nothing. It would be great if Arcane could introduce an option to change the stick dead zone and the actual acceleration of the aim. Now, I didn't play on PC, so I don't know how it feels for mouse and keyboard, but on controller it definitely felt horrible. I know on Deathloop they had similar issues with the aiming, but so I don't know how they've seemed to have gone a step backwards in this aspect. But luckily the AI in Redfall is so terrible that missing a few of your shots doesn't really make a big difference, because you're not going to die anyway. The enemy AI in Redfall is also sorely lacking. Many enemies exhibit predictable behaviour patterns that can be easily exploited, and their pathfinding is often faulty, leading to instances where they become stuck or simply fail to engage the player. This lack of challenge from the AI makes combat feel shallow and unrewarding. There have been multiple instances where I've been right in front of an enemy and they are for some reason unable to detect me, and the lack of a dedicated stealth kill animation is really noticeable as well, and sometimes it's just laughable. Considering how often and easy it is to sneak around and kill a whole group of enemies without being seen, there's just really no excuse for not having a dedicated stealth kill option when all of their other games had one. So Redfall's level design and environmental interaction are another area in which the game falls short. The environment feels empty, and you can walk for minutes without encountering enemies or local events. Obviously you've got your typical open world activities like finding collectibles. In this game they're called gravelocks, And obviously you can unlock fast travel points as well, and liberate safe houses, which essentially just involves you turning on the power, and that's it. Now in these safe houses you can restock your ammo, restock your medkits, and you can unlock new quests at these safe houses, where the final one involves you killing a boss and you get a skull. These skulls are essential for completing the main missions. For example, in the first area you need to collect 3 of these skulls to progress into the next area. There's also these things called vampire nests as well, which offers some challenge, but it's basically a big group of vampires and then you have to stake 3 enemies, which explodes like a big vampire heart, and then you just run out. The environment are cool in these vampire nests, but again, the gameplay mechanics just let it down. It could be so much more than what it is. Many of the game's levels feel linear and restrictive, forcing players along a predetermined path with little room for exploration or creative play, which is really sad given how their past games wanted you to play creatively and allow the player to complete the mission in a variety of different ways. However, most buildings only have 2 or 3 access points, where most of the windows and doors are boarded up, so you can't access that way, and missions normally require you to scour the area to try and find a key that will allow you to open the door, and sadly that's the only way you can progress. I've tried multiple times not to have to get the key by trying to scour the rooftops to try and find another access point, but sadly to no avail. So most of the missions end up feeling like a treasure hunt. Crafting and resource management are integral parts of many modern games, and Redfall is no exception. However, this game's crafting system is overly simplistic, if you can even call it a crafting system, and lacks so much depth. The resources required for crafting are so easy to come by, you just pick up stuff in the world, and this basically salvages it into parts. Now what you do with these parts is up to you. You can either buy lockpicks, medkits, or you can buy guns from a randomly generated set of weapons, but most of the time these are worse than what you already have. During the game I only ever spent my resources on medkits and lockpicks and wires to just open more chests. This lack of variety in crafting options severely limits the game's replayability and contributes to an overall sense of monotony. And unfortunately, the game's enemies also play a role in this sense of monotony. The game's enemy variety and encounter design leave much to be desired. Many of the game's enemies feel like reskin versions of one another, with only slight variations in their appearance and behaviour. This lack of variety quickly becomes tiresome, as players are forced to confront the same handful of enemies throughout the game's duration. Furthermore, the encounter design in Redfall is uninspired and repetitive. Many encounters feel like simple variations of one another, with players required to defeat waves of enemies in order to progress. Now there was one encounter which I enjoyed, and this was with the Rook. Now the Rook is pretty much a super powerful vampire that gets summoned in once you've done enough side content or main missions, and you build up this meter, and once this meter gets full, a Rook is summoned, and it's basically a really strong vampire who has the ability to summon red electrical storms. Now you can't just run away and go to the nearest safe house and hide there. You have to kill him, because if you go outside again, it's just going to respawn the Rook. So you have to kill him, which I thought was actually pretty fun, especially on the higher difficulty. It gives a sense of urgency and stress, which I feel like the game lacks, since the AI is so predictable and stupid. But the Rook is actually, I feel, is done pretty well. Now, being a looter shooter, obviously this game requires, well, loot. And unfortunately, Redfall falls flat in that aspect as well. Even legendary items that are supposed to be amazing just feel like reskins of previously acquired guns, just with an extra passive ability. It's a real shame, given that the actual aim is so bad. It could have enhanced the gameplay a bit more, but no. Even quest items, which are supposed to be like different, don't offer any gameplay differences. It's just passives again. Now, Redfall's story had the potential to be a captivating and immersive tale, taking players on a journey through a world plagued by supernatural threats and steeped in mystery. However, the game's narrative falls short, offering a superficial and often disjointed plot that fails to engage players on a deeper level. The story's pacing is inconsistent, with important plot points feeling rushed or glossed over, while less relevant side stories receive undue attention. The main questline in Redfall tasks players with uncovering the truth behind the vampire invasion and finding a way to put an end to the threat once and for all. This premise could have provided the foundation for an engaging and memorable story, but the execution leaves much to be desired. It is conveyed through moving stills or in the form of ghosts around the town. For a AAA game, one would expect a greater effort put into the presentation. It's another case of a game foregoing effort in building and showing their story, instead relying on the player finding notes scattered throughout the world. The game's primary antagonists is a one-dimensional character with unclear motives and a lack of depth. This makes it difficult for players to invest in the main conflict or feel a sense of urgency to defeat the main villains. Furthermore, the main questline often feels like a series of disconnected missions rather than a cohesive narrative, with little attempt made to tie the various threads together in a meaningful way. Redfall features a variety of side quests that players can undertake as they explore the game world. While some of these quests offer interesting diversions and provide additional context for the game's settings and character, many feel like filler content or repetitive fetch quests with little impacts on the overall story. The side quests often lack a sense of purpose and fail to contribute meaningfully to the game's world building. The game world itself feels underdeveloped and generic, with little in the way of unique landmarks or points of interest. This lack of world building is further compounded by the game's NPCs, who often feel like mere set dressing rather than living, breathing inhabitants of the world. The few memorable characters that do exist are often relegated to minor roles or are encountered only briefly during the course of the game. One of the potential strengths of Redfall's story is the game's rich lore and background information. However, this wealth of information is often poorly presented, with important details hidden away in easily missed collectibles, are buried in lengthy codex entries. This approach to conveying the game's backstory can lead to confusion and frustration, as players struggle to piece together the overarching narrative and understand the significance of key events and characters. Now, performance for Redfall is pretty terrible across the board on either PC or Xbox. On PC, Redfall's performance has been reported to be problematic, with several issues related to textures taking a long time to load and poor frame rates accompanied by constant stutters, regardless of the hardware configuration. I didn't play on PC, so if you want a more in-depth analysis of this, I'd advise looking at Digital Foundry's review of the game on PC. On Xbox, Redfall suffers from similar performance issues to those found on PC, with textures taking a long time to load, poor frame rates, and constant stutters. There were times when I'd loaded into the main base and the big texture on the floor had not loaded even after staring at it for a few seconds. I ran up to another room in the same building and walked back, and still about 20 seconds later the texture still had not loaded. Texture and shadow pop-ins seem to be a major issue with this game, as blood decals also don't load. There were also many instances where my FPS just bombed, especially when killing one certain type of enemy. You would expect a game on a powerful console and cartoonish art style that it would run fine at 30 FPS, but it even struggles to maintain this, as well as all the other graphical issues. Redfall is a disappointing entry in the cooperative shooter genre, with numerous shortcomings that overshadow any potential strengths. The game's poor performance, unengaging story, uninspiring looting system, and unsatisfying gameplay mechanics contribute to a lackluster experience that is difficult to recommend. Given the numerous issues present in Redfall, players seeking an enjoyable cooperative shooter with RPG elements are better off looking elsewhere. It remains to be seen whether future updates and patches can salvage the game and transform it into a more polished and rewarding experience. As it stands, Redfall falls way short of expectations and is not a game I'd recommend, even if it is free on Game Pass. If you've made it to the end of this video, I'd like to say thank you so much for watching. I don't generally like to be negative about games, but I was so disappointed with this release, I felt like I just had to say something. I apologise if there were any mistakes in the video, or any audio or visual issues. Obviously this is my first video, so I can only improve. If you've got any suggestions for games to review or do a playthrough of, let me know. I'm open to any suggestions. And with that, I've been Matty, and I'll catch you in the next one.